Hansraj E-Samvad Center under the aegis of Mahatma Hansraj Faculty Development Center under Ministry of Education, Government of India. At Hansraj E-Samvad, we deliver specialized content for students of University of Delhi to help them in their incoming exams. My name is Piyush Chaudhary and I am working as an assistant professor at the Department of English at Hansraj College, University of Delhi. I welcome you all to another lecture here. As we all know, this is another lecture in the ongoing series of the GE Individual and Society, which is offered as a generic elective paper, across the various colleges of the University of Delhi. I have created a playlist where I have covered the major units of this particular GE. Today's lecture is also an extension of this long lecture series. I will attach the link and the students can watch all the lectures that I have prepared till now. Today our discussion will be on the essay, The Brand Expands by Naomi Klein. I will right now begin with the introduction to this essay and then I will go on to a detailed summary as well. Now, when we talk about the current days in the current contemporary scenario, at a time when status symbol and the need to show off becomes important, Naomi wants us to understand that the pitfalls of globalization and the pitfalls of running after logos and brands, they are grave. She wants us to realize this. The essay tells us and warns us about the insidious ways in which the multinational and the commercial brands around us, how they affect us, how they affect our responses to the economics of globalization. The essay tells us how brands and logos colonize our minds and how they affect directly and often indirectly our responses and our decisions in the day-to-day life and in the day-to-day popular culture. This point is very important to understand if you want to understand the core philosophy behind the inclusion of this essay in our syllabus, isn't it? The essay basically, in a subtle way, Brand Expands, the essay in a subtle way warns us that how we as humans, we run after brands which add very little value to our day-to-day existence. The brands and the logo, it basically lures us into purchasing something which is not even that important. In this, the author Naomi talks about basically the forces of globalization, but also the forces of anti-globalization. By anti-globalization, I am not trying to say that she is against globalization, but rather Naomi is saying that she is against the economic monopoly of globalization. She is against the hegemonic power of some logos and brands in popular culture. The essay also in great detail talks about how any logo becomes a marketing tool, and it also warns us about the obsession around the logos and brands in a globalized world. These are some of the basic ideas that I am giving you in this introductory part of this lecture, basically introducing the topic and the various points that Naomi Klein is putting up. Globalization, as we all know, it also talks about opening up of economies and bringing the world closer together. But often in the race of globalization, who is usually left off? The poor and the marginalized section. They miss the bus of development, right, in this race. The essay makes us realize how our minds may be colonized without our realizing, and how brands and logos around us, how they affect our decision making on a day-to-day basis, right. Let me now go on to the detailed summary. I have just tried to introduce the topic to you. I will now go on to a detailed summary of this complicated essay by it's a slightly complex essay, but we will try to make it as easy, straightforward as possible, and I will be quickly covering the major points in the essay as well. Let me now take you to the summary of this topic. So, the author opens the essay describing when she was in 4th grade. When she was a young kid in class 4, she was madly obsessed about logos. She remembers that when she was just 8 years old, when and she says the reign of the logo terror had now begun. There was an excessive obsession around logos and everybody wanted to purchase things which had a high-end logo attached to it. So, the author tells us about that. Then she goes on to explain how several people purchased only the shirts and apparels which were of a particular company. In short, in the beginning of the essay, the author Naomi Klein is explaining the commercialization in the 1980s and 1990s in the West. she says that branding today has become far more ubiquitous, far more intrusive, far more omnipresent now. Look at the example, that she gives to show the obsession of the logos, and there is one example, and she says, my friend Monica tells me that her 7-year-old son marks his homework not with check marks, but with little red Nike swooshes. So these lines show the insidious and the far-reaching manner in which the logo has caught the imagination of a young 7-year-old kid, right? Even the kids are running after it. Then she goes on explaining the psychological effects of several brands such as Lacoste. She names these brands in the essay: Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Esprit, so on and so forth. Then next, as we move further in the essay, she goes on explaining how several multinational companies have started branding the culture as well. So not just the products, but the culture also is branded. This is important to understand. These companies and private firms are basically harping on the ideas and the images and the logos which people can associate themselves with, right? And this allows their logos to live forever. Now, once more, I will show you certain lines. Look at these lines to understand, how the branding of a culture is achieved. Very important lines, perhaps the most important lines in this essay. She says, by the mid-90s, companies like Nike, Polo and Tommy Hilfiger were ready to take branding to the next level. No longer simply branding their products, but branding the outside culture as well as sponsoring cultural events. They could go out into the world and bits of it as brand name outposts. For these companies, branding was not just a matter of adding value to a product, it was about thirstily soaking up cultural ideas and iconography that the brands could reflect by projecting these ideas and images back on the culture as extension of their brands. Culture, in other words, would add value to their brands, right? So if you look at these lines again, what is she saying? This is not how just the products, but how the culture also gets branded. Since the readers at the University of Delhi are far removed from the immediate social aspect of the essay, I would therefore give an idea from India to make it more easily accessible for Indian students, and that is the idea of Kingfisher. One gets reminded of the Indian condition, and we go back to the idea of the Kingfisher Airlines. It was an airlines which was functional in India from the first in the first decade of the 21st century, somewhere close to 2005 till 2010. And I have used this particular example because the Kingfisher Airlines was not just a brand, but it represented an entire lifestyle. People went to this airlines for the lifestyle that it offered. So the logo and the brand company Kingfisher becomes an extension of the culture of society. As I said, it was a lifestyle brand, right? So traveling in Kingfisher at that point of time was more a status symbol and a cultural symbol, because it represented a plush lifestyle, an elite lifestyle, right? So in other words, this idea can also be termed as what she terms as cultural expansionism. So she talks about the idea of cultural expansionism, the next part in the essay. Her idea of cultural expansionism is that the brand becomes a part of the culture. This cultural expansionism basically means that the logo of a brand or the picture becomes part of the popular culture to such an extent that the logo and the culture almost become virtually indistinguishable. So several companies and firms, they strive to ensure that their logo becomes a part of their culture, so much so that the lines between corporate sponsors and the sponsored culture have disappeared, right? Then the author also goes on to explain how sponsorship controls the sponsored. To explain this, she writes this particular essay, and she says, she writes these points. As its promotional value grew and as dependency on sponsorship revenue increased in the cultural industries, the delicate dynamic between sponsors and the sponsor began to shift, with many corporations becoming more ambitious in their demands for grand acknowledgement, uncontrolled, even buying events outright, right? So in short, basically in these lines which I just now read, she is explaining how sponsorship controls the sponsored. This has gone to such absurd levels today that in the 21st century, virtually everything needs a sponsor to become successful. This basically means that no amount of creativity can lead to the success of any idea unless they have a sponsor to sponsor them. Now, once more I'll show you a few lines, and as you can see on the screen, everything from small community events to large religious gatherings are believed to need a sponsor to get off the ground. Symptom number one of the sponsored mindset is we become collectively convinced, not that corporations are hitching a ride on our cultural and communal activities, but that creativity and congregation would be impossible without their generosity. So these lines that I just now read, this talks about the idea of corporate sponsorship. Here at the end, we are at the end of the essay. Naomi talks about the dangers of corporate sponsorship. Basically, she is saying that corporate sponsorship is now, it's the new normal, and the entire world has to deal with it, right? So this was in short the summary of this essay by Naomi Klein. These are some of the major dominant ideas that she keeps on repeating in this essay. As students of literature, as globalized citizens today, we have to understand, the insidious ways in which the brands function and how our socio-cultural response to any situation is also today to a great extent affected by the manner in which these corporate symbols, they have pierced and they have crept in our everyday life and our day-to-day everyday popular culture, right? Our responses are dictated by these ideas. In short, basically, the essay goes on to show the pitfalls of economic globalization and cultural expansionism. So the title, when we talk about the title brand expands, basically it means that any brand or logo can expand and become an extension of the popular culture. Anything which is at first a label on a cloth or a label on a mobile phone can become identical with the popular culture. So basically, the readers might be imagining, where has this entire essay come from? And the idea is that the policy of economic liberalization led to the rapid proliferation and growth of private players and private sectors in the 1980s and 1990s. And with more economic globalization, with more liberalization, slowly they became powerful symbols of culture. Naomi wants us to understand these symbols of cultures and how they affect our responses and how they have colonized our minds. So basically, this essay is you can say, a cry against corporate culture and how economic powers exploit us by giving us certain brands and therefore colonizing our minds and cultures and constantly affecting our choices and preferences in a somewhat clandestine manner and in a manner which remains more or less inconspicuous, right? So here I come to the end of this short lecture. I sincerely hope that this lecture cleared your doubts related to this slightly complex essay. Please share this video among your other friends who are appearing for their exams in the GE Individual and Society. As you already know, I have created a playlist. I will add the link in the description box in the playlist, and you can look at all the lectures and prepare for your exam. If you have any doubts and comments and suggestions, please feel free to drop them in the comment box below. I will see you shortly in another lecture on some other topic very soon. Thank you so much for your patient listening and for watching this video. I wish you all the best for your exams. Goodbye, take care, Jai Hind.